Hello and welcome to London. My name is Esther Matzer. I'm the Deputy Trade Commissioner in London, and I'm being joined by Matthew Eisner, founder and MD of Fountainhead Advisory. You're just here between China and heading to Dubai this evening, I understood.
Yep.
And Peter Pesel, our Head of Technology. Before we get started, two organizational remarks. This webinar will be recorded, and you will receive the link as well as the slides within the next week. So, to get started, what to expect during the next hours. After a short intro by myself, Matthew will deep dive into the topic of growth hacking, followed by a Q&A session in the end moderated by Peter. And please do feel free to post any questions already during the presentation. So, what is it about London? London is a creative hotspot, as you all know. It's second only to New York City. Who of you working in the creative economy wouldn't have dreamt of working at least for a certain time here in London? In total, we have 883,000 jobs in the creative economy, and 1 out of every 3rd person was born outside the UK. The gross value added is 42 billion pounds. And London, it's the sheer size of 9 million inhabitants, which make it enormous. It's a global financial center, as you all know, so money is here. And there's hardly any multinational company who does not have a presence here or even a European headquarter. And they are quite fond of flagship projects, thus fostering the creative industry as well. But it's not only the multinationals, but it's also by far the largest startup ecosystem within the whole of Europe and the 3rd in the world after Silicon Valley and New York. Here you have dedicated accelerators and incubator for the creative industry. Furthermore, there's talent. 4 of the top universities are based in London: Imperial College, Peter is an alumni, LSE, the King's College, and University College. It's liberal and cosmopolitan. And if you have thought of the B word, Brexit will not change it. The UK will remain the 2nd largest economy in Europe and the 5th largest in the world. For sure, we are not happy about the vote, I say as from the Austrian Trade Commission. But despite Brexit, there does remain potential for business. And one last message I have for you, in case you have concerns or questions concerning doing business in the UK, just let us know. Drop us a line, give us a call. We are here to support you. And 2 events which might be of interest to you, which we organize in November. One is on brand thinking, and the other one are pitching days and masterclasses. So you will have our contact details in the slides afterward, but I think it's time to hand the floor over to Matthew.
Thank you. Great. So as Esther mentioned, I'm here to talk to you about the basics of growth hacking. So a little bit about me. I've worked with a variety of startups, mid-stage companies, scale-ups, and startup ecosystem and investment companies. I've had the very stereotypical flashy Silicon Valley 0 to 100 to 0 kilometers per hour with a crash and burn at the end. I've also had a few successful exits, and all of the companies that I've really worked on have kind of taken an approach that is trying to be as lean, as efficient as possible, and finding mechanisms to grow a company's business that are as efficient and data-driven as possible. So we'll get into a lot of the details of what that means, as well as some basics just in terms of understanding the difference between marketing and growth hacking. But before we get into that, I thought it'd be fun to start with 2 very, not necessarily easy, but growth hacks that you can take to your own company, to the companies you're working for, depending on the services you provide, and be able to improve some bottom line businesses, build new leads, or capitalize on your existing audience in a way that can allow you to sell to them or work with them or collaborate with them. So the first is, I imagine most people here have a LinkedIn, potentially multiple ones if you run one for your company. And you've likely seen probably people posting about how LinkedIn is a very high opportunity social network right now. That's because there's basically a way to post on LinkedIn that has been working very, very well, that's sort of based off of a formula. And it's the idea of these sort of long form LinkedIn posts you've been seeing with very short sentences, and usually are telling some sort of personal story. And the reason why that works is for a few reasons, but basically you start with a very flashy first line. It gets people to click the little see more button that shows up on LinkedIn posts. And then when people click that button, LinkedIn sees that someone interacted with this post. It must be an interesting post. And so the process for doing that is one where I've actually included kind of a full checklist. But really what you can do to take this to your own business is think of an interesting or exciting or even negative story about you working in business or in the services you provide. Maybe it's about a client that was problematic, or your first great client, or a time you failed. But the more personal it is, the more people will relate to it and the more unique it will be. Write it into a LinkedIn post, so kind of make a story out of it. And make sure that kind of these sentences are very short and snappy so they're easy for people to read and understand. Make sure not to use anything like a city name, because if you use, for instance, London, only people in London would see your post. Don't use links. LinkedIn likes to keep people within LinkedIn. So if you have a link sending someone away from it, LinkedIn usually will try and show less people that post. Don't include images in your post for a similar reason. And then this is sort of a rule for almost all social networks, but when you make the post, go and send it to people as soon as you can who are your friends or your family, who you know you can get to like that post, because when LinkedIn sees that a lot of people are quickly liking this post, it sees that this is potentially viral content. So just anecdotally, in the past, before I tried this experiment, I would see about 1,000 to 2,000 views for each of my LinkedIn posts. Now I see more like 25,000 views. So almost somewhere between a 10 to 25 times improvement in terms of that effort. And this is something that a lot of people in B2B industries, in professional services industries, even in investment and fundraising, are using LinkedIn because it's a place where you can very, very targetedly interact with your audience that are kind of your highest value customers. The next kind of easy growth hack is actually using Twitter. So I figured I'd stick to another social network, but this one maybe is more oriented towards mass market solutions as opposed to something where you could reach out to a VC or a potential 5 or 6 figure client too. This would be more about potentially trying to get someone to download an app or read a blog post or something like that. But basically there's a tool called Audience that allows you to make entire lists of Twitter users based off of combinations of when was the last time they used Twitter? Do they follow more people than follow them? Do they use certain words in their Twitter bio? Are they located in a certain city? And so you can come up with a list that is, say, medical doctors in London who are over the age of 25, if that's your target market. And you can design a message in a very niche way to reach those people. What you then do is you would basically make a spreadsheet, write 10 messages that you would then use to automatically reach out to people on Twitter. So you would take that list of usernames that you got, you would post it into the Excel spreadsheet. You would write a quick little Excel formula to merge the username with the actual message. And then if you have 100 usernames, you've written 10 tweets, you copy those tweets 10 times. There's a tool called Bulk Buffer that you can use that basically allows you to upload a spreadsheet into a social media scheduling service. And so you can schedule hundreds and thousands of tweets at a time to go out to anyone who uses the word doctor in their profile. And you can use it for similar sorts of problems like that. But this is a really great way of attracting kind of mass market attention. So we dove into two pretty niche and specific examples, which doesn't necessarily tell you what growth hacking is, but at least gives you some examples. But let's take a step back. And before we even decide growth hacking, there is one commonality between growth hacking and marketing and really any other business operation, that is you're trying to drive a result. You're trying to make an improvement in revenue, in the amount of customers you have, in the amount of people who are using your product, all through sending some sort of communication. And so to understand if you're actually successful in the goal of your marketing and growth efforts, you need to be tracking something. And that can be very easy, and most of you probably are already tracking something. You're tracking your revenue and your profits for tax reporting purposes. Maybe you're tracking the number of clients you have to manage the team that you run internally. But you should also be thinking about, what are some other things that I should be measuring? Should I measure the number of calls or emails that I'm sending to try and develop new clients? Should I measure the number of times I post to Facebook? Should I measure the number of times I post to Twitter? And the answer is, if you're spending time doing those sorts of activities, it's probably worth measuring something. Now, you don't need to measure everything about what you're doing on Facebook: how many posts, how many likes, how many reach, how many fans from a specific country. But if you know, okay, I have this many likes from this many fans, then I can generally get an idea of, and I posted this many times, I can understand if I double the amount of times I post, does it double the amount of new people who like my page? And being able to answer very basic questions like that is very, very useful for understanding what's actually driving your business. So there's an exercise that, as we're going through this talk, that I think would be useful for us all to do. And if you have questions about it, feel free to ping them into the chat, and I can kind of answer if this metric makes sense for your business, or what the best metrics to use for certain channels are. But if you start to say, okay, this is how many times I posted to Facebook, and this is how much revenue, and you can compare those each month, then you can see, when I post to Facebook more often, I see more revenue. Or maybe you can't, but you can at least start to answer some of those questions. And really, what that system looks like on a long-term basis is just a spreadsheet. It's just columns of the dates and rows of the actual metrics you're tracking. And once you've done this for a few months, you can start to just glance at this sheet and start to see some pretty interesting things that are, when I post to Twitter, it seems to have a much greater impact on new customers submitting inquiries to me than when I post on Facebook. Just for example, you can answer lots of similar questions. And I've included a bit.ly link here that you can visit if you want to have a template of this spreadsheet that you can use while we're going through this talk. So now to get into some of the more fun topics. So what is the difference between marketing versus growth hacking? And I'd say they're all quite similar. But first, let's start with kind of a conceptualization of what is marketing. Marketing is basically the idea of trying to convince or sell or send a message to an audience that drives them to do some sort of action. So it's largely attributed with having been, in concept, created by one of Sigmund Freud's nephews, so Edward Bernays. He's known as the father of public relations, and had worked on some very interesting projects that included making cigarettes not a taboo for women to smoke anymore. It used to be something that cigarettes were a very masculine product. And basically, Edward realized that there's 50% of the market that we're not selling to. And so he started an entire press campaign while working for a cigarette company to basically make it socially acceptable for women to smoke cigarettes. Now, the idea in modern days of it being somehow taboo for a woman to smoke a cigarette is completely absurd. And that opened up a huge kind of potential in the market for them to sell to. And basically what he did was he took topics in kind of crowd psychology and merged it with psychoanalysis. So basically, how can I influence someone's decision-making and psychology on a mass scale? And this was basically the insight that led to the founding of the traditional advertising marketing industry. But as marketing has grown over the years, it's becoming infinitely more complex. It used to be, back in the advertising days, you would buy a billboard or buy a radio commercial or buy a TV ad. And you had maybe 50 different TV channels you could pick from and a spattering of billboards. Whereas now there are 100 different social media sites that you can use, which all have their own settings for how you can use advertisements. They still are all those traditional marketing mechanisms that we mentioned before, but there's paid advertising, there is product-based advertising, there is the ability to incentivize people to sell for you through referrals and cash back and kind of referral fee schemes. So it's much more overwhelming than it was in those days. And so in response to that, growth hacking has sort of emerged, which is basically the idea of, instead of focusing on all of these activities at once, let's find the 2 or 3 activities that are driving our business most efficiently and focus on those. And so to be able to do that, you need a very multifaceted skill set. Usually this marketing is taking place online because that's usually the highest return on investment form of marketing. So you need the ability to actually put these assets on the internet, so web development. You need the ability to track what works and what doesn't, so data collection and analytics. You need the ability to actually distribute this content, so content production and social media campaigns. And so there's a lot of pieces that sort of fit together that allow a growth marketer to understand, how can I potentially approach this problem in a way that's scalable, repeatable, and profitable? And we'll talk a little bit more about those 3 sort of kind of qualities of a growth hack later on. But basically what this growth hacker is doing is trying to find where they can find the most opportunity to grow a product or to grow a service or a business. So you can think of it as a hacker in the traditional computer science sense as someone who is trying to exploit a system and trying to find a loophole that can allow them to get value from it. So maybe it's someone who is trying to hack a delivery service website and find a coupon code that can get them free or discounted deliveries. Or maybe it's someone who has found a way to put their name in a database that prevents them from getting speeding tickets. These are both real world examples of hackers who have found ways to improve their life in some way through computer science and through exploiting a loophole in a system. When you think about this from the context of a growth hacker, they're doing the same thing, but with a more specific focus of growing a business. And so there are some really interesting real world examples that we can go into to talk about that a bit. But first, before we go into kind of a very holistic look at what growth hacking can actually look like for a company, just quickly, so I have a bit of another conceptualization around growth hacking that is a difference between growth hacking and growth marketing. So we were talking about a hacker who potentially would exploit a database. You would not hire that hacker to build your back-end architecture for your company if you're building a software product. And you would not hire that growth hacker who tries things that maybe are a bit experimental, maybe could hurt your brand, maybe are even potentially illegal, especially with regulation like GDPR coming into effect. A lot of past growth hacking tactics are actually now illegal. But there is an idea that you would hire a professional engineer to build your database, and you should hire a professional marketer to build your marketing and your growth. Now, a professional marketer, just like a professional engineer, will hack around a bit, and they will actually create kind of technical hacks, just like a marketer will create growth hacks. But the piece that's missing from growth hacking is a true strategic alignment. So someone who's growth hacking might be trying to grow the number of Instagram followers you have. However, if your business doesn't actually benefit from having more Instagram followers, why does that really matter? If you're not actually going to sell to any of those users on Instagram, then all this growth hacker has done is find a way to make a number look really, really good. But that number doesn't help your core business. Just like a hacker might find a way to exploit a system to get a discount, but that discount isn't something you can build a software product around. So just something to keep in mind. And so I have an example up here that is PayPal versus a startup named Klinkle. So if you want to see the most epic crash and burn startup story that you've ever heard, Klinkle raised about $25 million. And by the time they shipped a product to market about 4 years later, after turning over their management team twice, the product was a prepaid debit card. And their growth hacks were to give away money on the street in San Francisco. So they're giving away free money, and they're not even making people use their product or find them new users. Whereas PayPal, instead of just giving you free money, they give you free money inside of PayPal. So they give you money in a way that forces you to use their product. And their most important metric is how many people are using our product. And so you can see that actually aligns with the strategy. Whereas just handing money out to people on the street, it's very hard to have a strategic way to do that. So that's how I would conceptualize the difference between hacking and marketing as it relates to growth. So how do you actually go about starting to build some of these growth hacks? I mentioned that it's sort of a process of experimenting, seeing what the highest efficiency marketing tactics you can use are by collecting a little bit of data. And then the next piece is really solidifying them into as repeatable and scalable as a process as you can. So basically trying to make each message as high conversion rate as possible, trying to find better and better audiences to target that are more in line with your service offering and where your value proposition resonates with them. Those pieces can allow a growth hack to be something that's not just one email campaign that goes out to people but then works, but one that is a set of 20, 30, 100 email campaigns that each time you send them become more and more effective. And so that's where growth hacking can really start to see exponential growth when you start to have a repeatable process that you can improve over time to drive growth. And that's a growth engine. And so really there's 4 steps to creating this. First is coming up with the ideas of what you want to test. The second is actually testing those ideas and collecting data on them. The third is understanding which of these ideas can potentially be very repeatable or potentially automatable for us. And then the 4th step is basically collect data to optimize those experiments as much as possible. And so creating a plan is particularly important because it allows you to understand what the possibilities are, to prioritize them, and to start to be able to lay out operationally who will manage the different parts of this execution, and how can we start to improve and make sure that we're measuring what we need to in this execution so it can become more and more impactful over time. Traction is getting those first couple of customers through the door. So validating that this idea actually works, either through generating profit, generating signups, generating subscriptions to an email newsletter, but some sort of output that proves that what we're communicating to people resonates with them and delivers value to them, and they will come to us when they're presented with this information and convert to a valuable touch point for us. And a lot of companies will have, especially software companies, will have a lot of problems getting this first step of traction. And it really is very important to bring that traction and to bring the conversion point and the value point as close to the people you're trying to target as possible. So you can see in this slide here, this is not a very good job of bringing that conversion point to that customer because they have to cross an electric rail to get there. To scan the QR code is the conversion point here. So as much as you can do to reduce friction makes it more likely you can find that traction. And then once you've found the traction, you know that what we have resonates with someone. Now, how do we go find more people like that? Or how do we make what we say resonate with them even more? And that's where you get into process. So that is finding where this person or this target audience lives. Are they in Facebook groups? Are they in Twitter groups? Are they on Reddit? Are they on other forum platforms? Are they on an actual traditional web forum that is a forum for musicians or for investment bankers? And all of these communities exist. And so understanding where these people interact, and even potentially interviewing those people who were successful traction in the first phase to understand, well, where is my audience interacting that I maybe don't know about? Those can be incredibly valuable places to market to those users. Ensuring that it's scalable. So basically, if you know that you're going to run out of this target audience very, very quickly, or you know that when you're sending these messages, you have to do it through email, and sending them one at a time is much more difficult than figuring out how to send 500 at a time. These are all the pieces that can make this process much more scalable over time and have much faster increasing returns as you execute it the second and third time. And the last piece is predictable. And for something to be predictable, you have to be able to measure an output. But if you know that I've run this campaign 5 times and I typically see 10% of the people who I send this email to opening it, then you can know if I go get 100 people, I should expect to have 10 of them open it. And if more of them open it, then maybe I found a good group of people. Maybe I've improved my message in some way, shape, or form that makes them more likely to convert. Or maybe it's just random chance that this 100 group of people was slightly more likely to open it than this last group. But you can at least start to measure and start to understand in a much more objective way what's working and what's not. And then in terms of accelerating growth, so taking that process you've built, from there, what you're really looking to do at a late stage is collect advanced data, automate some of these processes to be executed entirely by a computer, more advanced sort of tactics like that, which really, if you're a small business or a freelancer or a consultant, are probably not things that you're going to be looking at doing. This is usually for software platforms, and we'll talk about a couple of examples around this. And really, at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out what works, you're trying to find your initial traction, and then you want to make it as easy and efficient as possible to repeat that process again and have the same result or a better result. And so how do you know it works? We actually collect data. And so this is where that metric tracking sheet that I showed you guys, that I'll give you the link to again, that you can go and take that and copy it and add your own metrics to. But if you're collecting data, you start to take a lot of questions that previously maybe you were arguing about with your co-founder, or maybe you have always known that, this is a question I could really easily answer with data, but I don't know how to collect it. Or even things that you didn't think that you could answer with data can start to emerge as trends once you start to just put those numbers in a spreadsheet. And it makes those conversations around 2 people having a subjective opinion much easier to resolve because you have an objective one if you have data. And so how do you start generating data? You lay out your organizational processes, whether it's acquiring a new customer, whether it's delivering a project, or whether it's your product actually delivering the service or the value proposition to a user, and you lay it out as a process. So if I am selling a service, I would say my first step is I find a list of people I potentially want to sell to, and I might have 1,000 of those. And then I filter them down to the people who I'm going to spend my time to call. I might have 100 of those. I filter down to the ones who actually answered my call. I might have 50. And then the ones who actually were interested, I might have 20. And you can see these layers, which are referred very often as a funnel in marketing, allow you to start to collect metrics of how many people at this step can I expect to get to the next step. And as you make changes to those steps, you can start to see what improves the rate of conversion between those steps and what doesn't. And so starting to think about your marketing and your operational services, your product, whatever it is that you're providing as a process makes it much easier to start to measure and to start to break down the phases of selling your service or of activating a customer much more tangible and objective and numerical. From there, you want to actually set goals. And so it's very important that goals have 5 attributes. It's important that they be specific so that you are actually not saying, I want to grow revenue by the end of the year, but I want to grow revenue by this amount through this operation that we perform. Measurable, meaning that there's actually a quantifiable number there. So revenue by £1,000 per month. Having an actual quantitative element makes it much easier to measure, did I succeed or fail at reaching this? It should be attainable, so realistic. It should be relevant. And so this was what I had mentioned about the Instagram followers. So if a growth hacker is able to drive Instagram followers, because Instagram's a great platform to build followers through, but those followers don't actually ever purchase anything or aren't interested in your product, then how useful and how relevant were those followers really? And then the last is time-based. So you want to set a deadline. I want to perform this by this date or in the next 3 months, which makes it much easier to compare performance on goals. It also means that you don't kind of perpetually chase a goal that maybe was the wrong goal to reach. So maybe it's something that was too hard or too difficult. If you make these goals time bound, then you can adjust the goals without having to say you completely failed at it. So it's something that makes it much easier to make that improvement over time. So I mentioned there is the KPI tracking sheet. So again, this is how you're able to measure the success on those goals. This is how you're able to compare, did what I tried last month work better than what I tried this month in generating revenue? Did this channel work better than that channel in terms of driving users to my website? And so just to say, starting to use this spreadsheet earlier rather than later is something that can really help you focus your business on what actually works to grow your business as opposed to what you think works to grow your business. So let's go through a case study and kind of talk about growth hacking at various stages of kind of a company. Because really what you growth hack really depends on what your goals are at that period of time. Because growth hacking is, we have a metric and we want to grow it as efficiently as possible. And that metric that is the core goal, the SMART goal, changes for each company. So let's look at Airbnb, who I'm sure we're almost all familiar with. So when they were first starting out, they had a big issue in that they didn't have enough money in their kind of bank accounts to be able to keep the business running. So at one point they were looking at shutting down. And around that time, there was a presidential election in the US, and the two founders were both designers by background. And so they said, okay, well, let's create a product that we can sell related to the elections and try and make some money to keep running the business off of that so we can have a bit more runway. So they launched cereal. Then they did one box of cereal for one candidate and another box of cereal for the other. And they, I think, created about 25,000 boxes of each and sold them for $40, which is probably about 10 times the typical price of a box of cereal. They sold them out. So they sold about $100,000 worth of these cereal boxes. And actually, when they went to Y Combinator and applied there, one of the managers of Y Combinator said, well, if you can sell cereal boxes, I think that you can sell people's unused space in their apartment, and accepted them into Y Combinator. The next stage, what was really the issue, is that they didn't have enough homes on the platform. So they had a lot of people looking for homes, but they couldn't find enough people to actually list their rentals on the site. And what they did is they realized that, well, most people who are renting houses in San Francisco use a site called Craigslist, which is a San Francisco-based sort of classified site. And really the entire housing market in San Francisco is on Craigslist. And so what they did is they figured out, let's reach out to everyone who lists a short-term rental on Craigslist and automatically email them and say, hey, you should post this on Airbnb. That started to work pretty well. And so what they did after that is, let's say, okay, when someone posts a request looking for an apartment, let's send them a link to Airbnb as well. And what they were able to do with that was they onboarded 60,000 apartments that they could lease in the Bay Area alone. And eventually, Craigslist shut down the automation that they were using to do this, but not until after they had nearly doubled their user base with apartments that people could rent, basically by just using another platform where all of those people were currently looking for that service. And so that was something that was extremely successful for them in solving that early B2B traction problem for them. After that, they realized that their big problem was, okay, we want more people to actually be booking the platform, through the platform. We have a lot of people who are selling their apartments and a lot of people who are renting their apartments, but there's not as much frequency of them actually coming together in the marketplace as we would like. And so what they realized was listings with good photographs get booked far more often. And so what they did is they started sending photographers around to Airbnb apartments in New York. And eventually realized that these apartments that they had the photographers go to were much more profitable. They made more money, and so they actually, for a while, provided this as a free service. and then eventually realized that actually, if we sell this photographer to the apartment owner, we generally can tell them that they're going to make 10% more from doing this, and we will also charge them for that now. And so they've created this a growth engine and an actual revenue stream out of something that was just supposed to help them get more bookings and so improve their existing revenue stream. And so what they did is they actually launched a service with 13,000 photographers who now go around to your home and take photographs of your property when you're ready to list it. And they sell this as a service. The last step is really when they looked to scale this growth. And so what they did is they started collecting lots of data. They started running tests. So in one example, they have invite your friends, get $25. And the next they have give $25 to your friends. And so they would test all sorts of messages like this to figure out which one is 1% better than the other one. That's a type of experiment and growth that you can't really do until you have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of users. But just something to keep in mind in terms of that is the long-term trajectory of these sorts of growth tactics, is really making them something that can be automated and scale. And so the results, Airbnb has nearly 80 million guests in 2016. They're the 5th largest hotel rental service in the world, and they're in pretty much every country in the world. This was 2 years ago, mind you, so these numbers are probably even significantly higher now. So that's kind of can give you a bit of a picture of what a trajectory of building growth over the course of a growing company and then a grown company can look like. But the question that might be kind of in your guys' heads is, well, how do I start doing that? And so there's a lot of tools that can help you with that. There must be about just 3,000 on this page alone, and this is from, again, 2016. So it can be a bit overwhelming in terms of how do you just start to taking your first steps here. What I would say is there's a few tools that you probably need to be able to even start to measure the results that can allow you to start being a bit more data-driven with how you're making these decisions. So Google Analytics, I'd say, is the one that's probably most important. It lets you see what people are doing on your website. Search Console, if you care about organic search and that's something that's important to you, is also very important. And an email system is also probably important in some way to have basic measurement of how many people are opening your emails, how many emails are you sending, things like that. Apart from that, really, as long as you have that spreadsheet where you can pull all of those numbers together in one place and look at them all at once, that's really all you need. Maybe you have a CRM system like Salesforce if you do a lot of work with clients and are doing a lot of sales and account management. Maybe you have an internal database if you actually have a product you're providing to clients. But really, the solutions you need are pretty minimal. And the approach that I was just taking is figure out what tools do I actually need, find the bare minimum solutions I can for those, and then find a couple of more tools that might help me. And if they don't, find another tool and experiment with that. And if they do, solidify it. Don't try and do anything too crazy with it, but just find the really simple way that this tool works for me and make it something that's a very, very simple process that you can repeat in the future. So these are some of the tools that I use pretty typically. So I mentioned Google Analytics. BuzzSumo is great if you use a WordPress site. If you're not sure what website to use, WordPress is a great alternative. If you have your own web developer or are competent with web development, consider using something heavier. I would not suggest using lighter solutions like Wix or Weebly or Squarespace. They're much less friendly for organic search traffic and much more difficult when you want to go and set up the data tracking that you potentially would want to set up down the line. There's a ton of other tools, and if there's a specific kind of use case or problem that you're trying to solve with a tool, feel free to ask that as a question and we can try and get to it in the Q&A. And really, as I was saying, find the most minimal marketing stack set of tools that works for you. Make sure you know how to use them and that they work efficiently for you, and then start to add small pieces to that over time. So then, as I mentioned, we have this spreadsheet. And so if any of you have started going through and adding your metrics and kind of KPIs that you think you should be tracking, or you have questions about which KPIs you're kind of are trying to decide between, or what might make the most KPIs for your most sense in terms of KPIs for your business, please ask them as a question so we can get to it in the Q&A, because I think those will be interesting questions and beneficial for other companies who are selling a monthly retainer service or who sell a one-off consulting fee, to understand what are the metrics that are important for measuring that type of business. And so that's actually it. I think we're finished a couple of minutes early. So I don't know if you want to start the Q&A now.
Perfectly fine. Thank you very much, Matthew. And yes, we now will start the Q&A in a few moments. But before we will start playing a short video.
Dein Startup hat Wachstumsschmerzen? Dein Produkt hat Draft, Mockup, Beta-Version und Prototyp-Status bereits verlassen und erzielt erste Umsätze? Dein Funding-Ziel sind 500.000 € und mehr? Wunderbar! Dann bewirb dich jetzt für das nächste Startup-Katapult in London und optimiere deine Skills beim Masterclass und Pitch-Training bzw. zeig dein Potenzial beim Investors Pitching vom 25. bis 28. November. Wir freuen uns auf deine Bewerbung.
Also wir können gar nicht sagen, was unser persönliches Highlight ist, weil von den Vorträgen über die Networking-Events alles extrem super war und uns wirklich, wirklich weitergeholfen hat.
Es waren extrem unterschiedliche Leute dort, von Investoren über potenzielle Partner, aber auch in einer Dichte, die man jetzt nicht erwartet hätte.
Es war ein Augenöffner, einfach zu sehen, was gibt es für Möglichkeiten, auch von Investorenseite, vom Markt her, und dieser Gedanke über UK in den ganzen englischsprachigen Raum zu wachsen.
Sicher die Punkte, dass es sehr, sehr aufregend ist, neue Stadt kennenzulernen, neues Ökosystem kennenzulernen. Ein tolles und spannendes Erlebnis.
Es ist spannend, Feedback zu bekommen von einem Local, wie man was präsentiert. Der Inhalt bleibt der gleiche, nur wie man es aufbaut, wie man zu einem Thema hinführt, ist scheinbar doch ein bisschen anders wie bei uns. Nicht so sehr technisch, sondern eher lösungsorientiert.
Also bei den Vorträgen war es so, dass Online-Marketing, Growth-Hacking, Branding, das waren wirklich die Vorträge, die immens was für uns gebracht haben.
Die unternehmerische und akademische Auseinandersetzung ist in London schon mit Rücksicht auf die Größe der Stadt und ihre globale Bedeutung als Finanzplatz und als Unternehmensstandort um vieles tiefer und um vieles dichter als anderswo. Und davon profitieren österreichische Unternehmen.
Auf jeden Fall, ohne zu zögern, ja.
Definitiv.
Sollte jeder, der ins Ausland gehen möchte, mal machen sowas.
Okay, we are back with Matthew, who just gave us a very interesting presentation, insight into growth hacking and what it means. And we have received a couple of questions from you already. And the first one was actually if you will have the slides afterwards. And yes, we will send you everything in the next few days, within a week, the link to the presentation. You will have access to all the information that you've been seeing on the screen today. But before we start off with the questions from you, from the audience, I will ask you, I imagine myself now being a startup, a very young startup, 2 people, and I've never done anything with growth hacking before. I've posted maybe something on Facebook.
So now you're an expert after this talk.
And now I'm an expert of this talk, but I still feel like you gave a nice insight into a lot of tools, but where should I start? What would be the first step for me to do?
Well, and so what I would say is the best place to start is probably where you're already working that you feel is effective for you. So if you've been posting to Facebook and that seems to drive users, or you've talked to your existing customers and they say, we found out about you through searching online or through one of your emails or your newsletter, usually that's a good indication that you have traction on that channel and it's worth reinvesting in that channel a bit more. The way you reinvest in that channel a bit more is you start running tests. So potentially you post for 1 week at one time on Facebook and another week at another time. Potentially you send 2 emails to half your audience and the other half of your audience with a different subject line, or one has images and one doesn't. And you start running these little experiments, and really that's where you can start. Is just finding what you're doing already and asking a question while you do it.
Okay, that's a good starting point. There was another question actually on LinkedIn as well. Does it only work on private posts, or does it also work for company profiles?
So it's a hard question to answer because actually the tactics themselves change as more people use them. So you've probably seen that style of kind of lots of little sentences on LinkedIn in terms of how people post. And the more people that use it, the less effective it becomes. So I would say that yes, in theory, it does partially work for companies' pages. Company pages are a little bit, usually get less reach because when you follow a company, you're usually less interested in them than when you follow an individual. You usually have a personal relationship with them. So I'd say it's a bit harder to do this with companies' posts. You can also always share a company post to your own timeline on LinkedIn. So that's sort of a way to get around it. But yes, most of the concepts as well, the idea of trying to get a lot of likes on your post quickly to make it look like the post gets good engagement. That's true for every social network. So that's true for Facebook, Instagram. So some of these concepts as well are kind of universal. Other ones are very, very specific to the platform. So for instance, the idea that you maybe don't want to use the name of a city in your post is probably used by a few other social networks as well. The idea that you don't want to use an image, though, is one that is really kind of unique to LinkedIn, because when you post an image to Facebook, usually that, and Twitter actually, I think there's a bit more data around this, but I think it's around a 30 to 40% increase in engagement if your post has an image versus if it doesn't. Whereas on LinkedIn, the opposite's true. So it's something where I would say the best way to find out if this works for your business, because it's also very different for a business that's selling financial services versus a business that's selling luxury apparel. Luxury apparel is something that people want to take pictures of. Not really sure how you plan on taking a picture of financial service, but something where different platforms and different styles of posting will probably work differently for those. So the financial services probably is going to be a lot less image heavy than the apparel company. And maybe images work for the apparel company on LinkedIn, but just are awful for the financial services company on LinkedIn.
Okay, great. There was also another question coming up a couple of times in terms of budget. What budget do we need? Is there a framework for your company? What do we need to think of?
So, I mean, there's a few ways to look at budget. There's, I mean, actual spend in terms of how much money you're trying to kind of put into your efforts. And then there's also a resource, which could be a factor of spend. So if you're looking at budget as this is our ad spend plus our employee costs, that's one way of looking at it, and system costs as well. The other way of looking at it is potentially maybe you have a junior marketer and you're wondering how much budget should I give them per month. It's probably best to look at those in kind of the same silo. And it really depends on your business size and how much benefit you're getting from marketing. Really, so I'd say if you want to hire a junior marketer, you're probably looking at least £2,000 a month for a decent one. And then if you want to enable them to kind of do some experimenting with paid, you probably need to give them a budget of about $1,000 a month or £1,000 a month for actually running ad campaigns. The problem with those is, especially with paid advertising, the more budget you put into it, the faster you get results and the faster you can learn from it and the quicker the spend per click goes down. So it's a bit of a catch-22. What I'd say is more importantly than how much you can spend is setting milestones. So saying, I'm going to spend £3,000 and I'm going to find a freelancer to work on a blog post and I'll spend 10 hours of my own time marketing that blog post to various channels. And if I see 10,000 visitors to my website from this effort, then I will take the next step and invest £10,000. So I'd say what's more important is sort of setting the outcome you want to achieve and setting a budget that you'd like to achieve it at. And then once you've run that experiment, say, did I achieve that budget or that outcome? Was the outcome more beneficial? So I got 10,000 viewers, but did I get twice as many people actually submitting lead requests and kind of client kind of proposal requests to me that I was expecting? And once you have kind of a picture of those numbers, it makes it a lot easier to say, okay, well, if I get twice as many people into the site and see the same rate of conversions and lead submissions that I was seeing before, I know that I can justify spending twice as much money. And so when you can break it down to a bit more of a math equation, it takes a lot of the guesswork out.
Okay, great. We have more and more questions actually coming in, and also a few comments. For instance, one says here, great talk. So I guess that's,
thank you.
Back to you. One very specific question we have here is, what is meant by MOM in the KM spreadsheet?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that means month over month, and you could also do WOW, so week over week. Basically, it is a comparative statistic that says how many more or less did we see this month versus last month. So you would calculate that by the second month minus the first month, all enclosed in parentheses, divided by the first month, whatever that metric is, and it shows you how much percentage did that metric increase or decrease between last month and this month.
Okay. Another one following up is, again, starting with thank you for a very interesting presentation. So I guess the audience really enjoyed your talk. What are good tools to find out the best keywords for a landing page?
That's a good one. Yeah, so SEO is kind of one of my specialties, actually, so I'm a good person to ask this to. So the one SEO tool I'd say that's the most important SEO tool that it's stunning to me how often I go to a website and it's not being used, is Google Webmaster Tools or Search Console. They renamed it maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, but they still use both names. But so that basically is, think Google Analytics, but for very, very specifically search. So you can see a lot of information that's missing in Google Analytics. You can see, did Google not read our website properly? And you can see what words people are actually searching for to find you, what position on Google search results you show up for those words, and what the click-through rate is on those words. And so those are 3 really interesting pieces of data that we could talk about for a while in terms of what those actually mean. So that's a really great tool. If you have 2 words and you're trying to figure out which word is potentially better or which version of a word or phrase is better, Google Trends is great for that comparison. And then there's an entire wider set of tools. So there's LSI keyword generators. So LSI Graph is a really good tool to come up with similar words based off of like a couple of words that you submit. Google AdWords actually has a tool called Keyword Planner that generates a lot of similar keywords for you. And Ahrefs or Moz are also 2 very good sort of SEO tool suites that have keyword kind of research tools in them that are very powerful.
Okay, great. We have more and more questions coming in, but I think we have to stop in 4 or 5 minutes. So I'm just taking maybe one more. But before that, also, I want to assure you, please feel free to contact us, Matthew, and to answer more and more questions, or if the more complicated ones require a bit more time to answer. We are always here. We don't want to cut too short. Please send us an email afterwards if you have any further questions that we haven't covered yet. I think there are more questions now on the screen that we can cover in the short period of time.
Yeah, feel free to email or even tweet at me, and maybe can respond to your question while I'm running around the London Underground. So yeah, whatever works.
Definitely. There's one interesting one as well for future reading materials. So there's one person asking, I really want to dig deeper into growth hacking. Can you recommend any cool sources or links?
Okay, that's a good one. So links, growthhackers.com is probably one of the largest kind of communities for this. It's sort of laid out similar to Reddit with kind of upvoted articles that you can search by the channel or like the type of marketing or stuff like that. It's a very strong community, but it's a lot of people sort of saying, hey, look at how good I am at growth hacking. Look at this campaign I ran. And sometimes the numbers aren't that realistic. Actually, some friends who run a growth marketing agency called Ladder.io. And they have a really great sort of portal where they list all of the growth hacking tactics that they've ever tried and have like a percentage return on investment from those efforts. It's not extremely detailed data, but it's really useful because they have 1,000 ideas for growth hacks that you can do. And so it's a great way to kind of come up with like little ideas for how can I maybe improve something I'm doing. In terms of more robust resources for this, so one of my favorite books kind of in this space is Nudge by Richard Thaler. So he won the Nobel Peace Prize for the Nobel Prize for Economics last year, and is a behavioral economist who is very, very famous in this space. And the book is all about how to create kind of decisions or purchase experiences or checkout experiences that are as likely to extract revenue from people as possible, or guide people to the decision that kind of you want them to be guided to. There's another researcher called Dan Ariely who writes a book called Predictably Irrational about how people make irrational decisions, which can very much be used in terms of, well, should I have this option first or this option first, based off of the fact that people usually pick the first option. So little things like that. I'd also suggest reading, some traditional marketing kind of books. So Blue Ocean Strategy is, a very good book about this space that's very, very relevant. There's a book called Lean Analytics and just The Lean Startup. Those two books are, very data-oriented approaches to this. Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 is very good about generating early stage traction. I could go on and on, I'm sure, about books. Academic research in consumer behavioral economics, those spaces can be really, really useful if you have a very specific question. But yeah, I'm sure I can keep ranting. OK Dork is a really good blog for this sort of stuff. So the former head of growth from Facebook. Also Andrew Chen was former head of growth. Yeah, and I'd say in general, go into like growthhackers.com or Andrew Chen or OK Dork, like those big blogs. If someone's mentioned on those blogs, they're probably also a very good growth hacker as well. And so you can kind of branch out kind of by like looking at different layers by just kind of following the breadcrumbs, I would say. I would say the best growth hacking reading you're going to do is someone who's in a space somewhat similar to you, who just takes a methodical approach to try and understand how to grow a business and grow a customer base in this area.
Okay, great. I think we are getting close to the end of the session, so I want to wrap up as well. It was a big insight for me as well. It was the first time that I'm exposed actually to growth hacking. Before I know about online marketing campaigns, I knew about SEOs, but that was until the end, and this takes it, I think, a step further. So thank you very much for that. Do you have anything else left saying to our Austrian community, to the startups, to the creative startups out there? Get in touch with Matthew as well. Get in touch with us. We are happy to answer all of your questions. Please drop us an email. The email address should be then on a link on the email that we will receive shortly, with the link to this video as well. The email address for London is london@wko.at, london@wko.at. So with this, thank you very, very much for joining us in these great numbers, for all these questions, and we hope to see you soon again at our next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.